Another question that many people have when migrating their workloads is, what are the action steps to take if you get stuck? Getting stuck when migrating is pretty common, especially if your migration plan is not super bulletproof and it's easy to let some things slip through the crack. So what I suggest when people get stuck in migrating is essentially not to completely start over, but really to just re-educate yourself on what the current problems are, because that helps you to find better solutions when you firmly understand what the exact problem is. So the first piece of that is reassessing some of the remaining workloads. You are going to want to make sure that you are focusing on the core foundational workloads that need to be migrated. A lot of people, when migrating, try to save these big legacy applications for the end, partly as a procrastination piece, partly because they want an example of something that's a little bit simpler being migrated first. That's totally understandable, and there's no need to migrate your legacy application first and foremost. But eventually it does need to happen if you are trying to become fully migrated to the cloud, which is what I generally recommend to my clients. This is because a lot of times hybrid cloud scenarios end up being way more expensive than fully cloud native applications or any other cloud native workloads, and even sometimes on-premise workloads. So you have to be really careful about assessing your workloads and making sure that the right ones are being prioritized. And in doing that, the questions you should ask yourself are, what do I need to host this in terms of infrastructure, in terms of budget? Where are the current roadblocks? So what is going wrong with your application or workload as it is? What exactly is failing? What isn't working as well as it could be? What is causing a lack in efficiency, etc. Then you need to figure out, okay, given what I need to host this and what the current roadblocks are, what are the knowledge gaps that I have? What exactly do I need to research next? So you'll want to do your research on your current workloads, hosting needs, what the roadblocks are and how you would mitigate those, and then what would make your application or pipeline better or more efficient. So this could be looking back at those platforms we mentioned earlier, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, or it could be really just any third-party applications that you hear about. So I mentioned earlier Splunk. If you have some sort of an issue that you can't potentially, if you have difficulty debugging, getting really granular logging service is going to be helpful for you in the future. After reassessing your remaining workloads, you're going to want to go back and adjust your migration plan accordingly. Intentionally migrating to a hybrid cloud environment, as I said before, can result in more complexities and much higher costs than others. So you want to think about where your migration plan is headed according to the current issues. We're going to go back to that migration plan that we mentioned in the first piece, where you revisit that migration plan and you're going to think about the security analysis, the people who are in charge of managing and maintaining this infrastructure once it is deployed, the correct environment selection and design, risk assessment, and rollout. Those are the main pieces that I like to consider. Another portion that people tend to get stuck on when migrating to the cloud is the security and disaster recovery portion. So taking into consideration the security and compliance pieces of the migration pie can really help you get unstuck when you are migrating. A lot of the networking and security pieces that you need to do. So for example, are you going to host your application in a virtual private cloud? Do you need to encrypt your data at rest and in transit? If so, how do you do that? Where are you storing your data? What is the cost of doing so? All of these very specific questions that we like to often leave out until we get the basic strategy completely lined up, or sometimes we'll start migrating before we even lock down our environment. And this can be really easy pitfall to avoid if you will just consider these pieces as you are implementing the infrastructure. And lastly, a way to consider these pieces while you are implementing this infrastructure is to automate what you have currently. So automating infrastructure, while it can be a bit daunting at first, especially if you don't have as much experience in Ansible, Terraform, or Chef, Puppet, really all of these infrastructure scripting languages. If you don't have experience in it, it's easy to want to avoid it. However, once you automate your infrastructure, it makes it way easier to make changes later on, to make improvements, and also even to make duplicate environments. If you want a disaster recovery plan and you can afford a disaster recovery plan that is a fully replicated environment of your core functionality to your business, then automated infrastructure is the way to do it. Because if you already have that infrastructure deployed, all you have to do is deploy the code that you already wrote again, and then you have a fully replicated functional environment of your application. So automating infrastructure can really help to make your application and workloads more resilient and self-healing. And in doing so, you're able to find some of these pitfalls, avoid them, and make little tweaks to your environment portion by portion, while seeing how it affects the whole infrastructure at once, instead of having to try to think through everything in the very beginning and make sure that it's perfect on the first deployment, because a lot of times that's not possible. So automating infrastructure really helps to make it easier for you to successfully migrate your application.